In this video, I'm going to show you how to multiply and divide integers. For Indiana, this is standard 7C3 and 7C4. Okay, so when you're multiplying and dividing, if you're looking at two numbers at a time, if the two signs match, then you're going to get a positive answer. If the two signs don't match, then you're going to get a negative. But a lot of times when you're multiplying, you don't necessarily stop at just two numbers. Maybe you're multiplying a series of 3, 4, 5 or more numbers. So what I'd like for you to think about is that every time you have two negative signs, those signs can, what I call, buddy up to make a positive. So if you have an even number of negatives, everybody has a buddy. Everybody's in a happy, positive mood, so it's a positive answer. If you have an odd number of negatives, then you always have somebody left over without a buddy, without a partner. He's in a sad, negative mood, so that creates a negative answer. So, for example, -3 times 4. I've only got one negative sign. So he doesn't have a buddy. It's going to be a negative answer. 3 times 4 is 12, so this would be a -12. The second one, 2 times -8. I know 2 times 8 is 16. Again, I've only got one negative sign. He doesn't have a buddy, so it's a -16. -10 times -3. Now, I've shown you on this first problem, I showed the multiplication with the dot. In the second one, I used the little X. Usually around 7th grade, when you start getting more problems with variables, you'll stop seeing that X as much to mean multiply because it starts to look too much like a variable and can be confusing. The way that you'll start seeing it a lot more now for multiplication is like this, when you just have parentheses right beside each other. If you have a number beside parentheses or parentheses beside parentheses, if there's no operation symbol in between, then it means to multiply. So in this one, I know 10 times 3 is 30. This time, I've got two negatives. Those two can buddy up. They're partners. They're in a positive mood. It's a positive answer. -7 times -2 times -1. 7 times 2 is 14. 14 times 1 is 14. Now, the rule for multiplying says if the signs are the same, then it's positive. The reason why I don't focus as much on that rule is because here we've got all the same signs, but it's not a positive answer. It's all about how many you have. That rule of the same and different signs only applies when you have two numbers that you're multiplying or dividing. So on this, look, this negative and this negative can buddy up. But then I've got this guy left over without a partner. He's sad. He's in a negative mood. It's a negative answer. I had 1, 2, 3 negatives. I had an odd number of negative signs, so it's a negative answer. On the next one, 5 times 3 is 15. 15 times 2 is 30. 30 times 1 is 30. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got an even number, so I know it's going to be positive. This one can buddy up with this one, and this one can buddy up with this one, so it's a positive answer. When you have exponents, be careful on this. First of all, don't make the common mistake of just doing -8 times 2. That doesn't mean -8 times 2. It's not a -16. And it doesn't mean do 8 to the second and then stick a negative with it. So I've got for this one, -8 times -8. A -8 times a -8 is a positive 64. Or you can go ahead and do your number to the exponent. So 8 squared, 8 to the second is 64. This is an even number. So I've got an even number of negatives. So that makes it a positive 64. -3 to the third means -3 is what I'm multiplying. 3 is how many times I'm multiplying it. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. I have an odd number of negatives. So while these two can buddy up, I've got this guy left over without a partner. So he makes the whole thing negative. So negative 27. Negative 1 to the fourth means negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. I already know that I'm going to have an even number of them because my exponent was even. So 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. I've got an even number of negatives. Everybody has someone to partner up with, so it's a positive answer. Negative 2 to the fifth. If you do 2 to the fifth, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. I have an odd number, so I'm going to have somebody left over without a partner, so it's a negative 32. Be careful in these because the ones that I just showed you, that's when you've got your number that you're multiplying inside parentheses. That's called your base number, and that's inside parentheses. If I had said this negative 8 to the second this way, then it becomes an order of operations problem. That doesn't mean negative 8 times negative 8. That means do 8 squared is 64. And then this means now do the opposite of that. So it's a negative 64. This problem here is very different than this problem here. For example, again, the negative 1 to the fourth, because your negative 1 was in parentheses, it means the negative sign travels with it every time. It's part of that base number. But if I had just said negative 1 to the fourth like this, then I do 1 to the fourth is 1. This means do the opposite of that. That would be a negative 1. So pay really close attention to whether it's in parentheses or not. If the negative is in parentheses with the number, then it is a negative number. If it's not, when you have an exponent problem, then it means do the opposite of your answer. I know it can be confusing, but those parentheses make all the difference. Division's the same way. Every 2 negative signs buddy up to make a positive. So on this first one here, I've got negative 10 divided by negative 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. I have 2 negatives. Those 2 buddy up. They cancel. This is just a positive 5. 15 divided by negative 3. 15 divided by 3 is 5. I've only got 1 negative sign, so he doesn't have a buddy. That's going to be a negative. Negative 12 divided by 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 1 negative leaves the whole thing negative, so it's a negative 3. And notice on these last two, I wrote them like fractions. We talked about how with multiplication, you'll start to see multiplying being indicated just with parentheses. With division, you're going to start seeing it a lot more set up as fraction problems. A fraction is a ratio. It's just another way of saying divide. The last one here, negative 18 divided by negative 9. 18 divided by 9 is 2. I have 2 negative signs. They buddy up. It's going to be a positive 2 for my answer. When you're dividing with zeros, it makes a big difference if zero's on the top or the bottom. So what I always tell my students, if you come out on top in a contest, or if you come out on top in a race, that's a good thing, right? It means you won. So that's going to be the good type of problem where you get an answer. That answer just happens to be 0. If zero's on bottom and bad both start with B. When zero's on the bottom, that's the bad kind of problem when you can't do it. The technical term is called undefined. It means no solution. You can also use a symbol for that. It's a 0 with a little slash through it. So on this first one, 0 divided by negative 8, the reason why it comes out to be 0 versus undefined, if I set this up as long division, so if it falls over and the top number lands inside my long division box, regardless of what's on the outside, if I ask myself, what do I multiply the outside number by to get the inside number? Well, multiply anything by 0 and you get 0. 0 times negative 8 is 0. So that's why my answer is a 0. It's a donut. That's what we always say in class. Sometimes I get really fancy with my donuts and I give them little sprinkles just to see if the kids are paying attention because I'm dorky like that. 0 over -5. So again, 0 would fall inside. You want to ask yourself, what do I multiply 5 by to get 0 for an answer? And that's, of course, 0. So when 0's on top, you get 0. You get donut. When 0's on the bottom. So if this falls over and 3 is on the inside, 0's on the outside, this time I want to ask myself, what do I multiply 0 by to get 3 for an answer? And at first, my students will yell out 3. But it's not 3. 0 times 3 isn't 3. 0 times 3 is 0. And then they know we're in the integer chapter, so they'll say -3. But it's not -3. 0 times -3 is 0. It's not 3. And then they'll say 0. And then they just start yelling out anything at all they can think of because they get stumped. But the truth is, you can't multiply 0 by something and get anything that's not 0. There's literally no way to do this. So when 0's on the bottom, that's when it's undefined or no solution. Bottom and bad both start with B. That's the bad kind when you can't do it. Doesn't matter if it's positive or a negative. -2 divided by 0, 0's on the bottom. You cannot do it. If this had been written out with your little division symbol, this one would have had the 0 first. So 0 divided by -8 or 0 divided by 5. Think of it like a contest again. I said that when you come out on top, that's a good thing. If you're first, that's a good thing. You're going to be happy about that. That's the good version of the problem. When 0's on the bottom, then it would be written last. If you come out last in a race or last in a contest, you're probably not going to be feeling too happy. So that's why it's the bad version when you can't do it. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about in this is word problems. A lot of times with word problems, I feel like it's fairly easy to determine if you're supposed to multiply or divide. But the one thing that catches a lot of people is when it's worded as how many times larger or how many times is great. It makes it sound like, at least in my opinion, like you need to subtract. And the common mistake is to do those word problems as subtraction. But what it's really asking is how many times does the smaller thing fit inside the big thing? And if you're talking about fitting inside, that's a division problem. So if it says how many times whatever, it's asking you to divide. For example, baby Sally weighs 8 pounds. Big brother Bobby weighs 56 pounds. How many times greater is Bobby's weight than Sally's? So it's saying how many times will that 8 fit inside the 56? So the answer would be 7, not 7 pounds, just 7 times greater. Okay? Here I said last thing, and I forgot we hadn't evaluated yet. Evaluate just means to substitute a number in and solve. Evaluate means solve. So I'm going to replace the variables with the numbers that I'm given for them, the values that I'm given. I wanted to show you these, not because they're any harder, but because of what the common mistake is that I've seen every year for so many years that I've taught. If it says A, B, I know they're right beside each other, but that doesn't mean to write down -2 right beside 5. My answer is not -25. And it seems so basic, but if you haven't seen it before, sometimes that's the first thing that you guess you should do. Right beside each other is just like when you have parentheses right beside each other, it means to multiply. So what this is really saying is -2 times 5. -2 times 5 is a -10. ABC. It doesn't mean put -25 minus 6 and just string it all together. It means do -2 times 5 times -6. And again, the parentheses, when I write it like this, are just saying, hey, look at me, I'm a negative number. 2 times 5 is 10. 10 times 6 is 60. I have an even number of negative signs. Those two negative signs can buddy up. They're in a happy, positive mood. It's a positive answer, a positive 60. Fraction bar means divide. So I'm going to put -6 on top negative 2 on bottom. 6 divided by 2 is 3. My two negatives there will buddy up, cancel out, make a positive. So that's a positive 3. And the last one, BC, means 5 times negative 6. And then I'm going to divide that answer by negative 2. 5 times negative 6 is negative 30. Negative 30 divided by negative 2 is a positive 15. As always, if there's anything else you need help with for 7th grade math, please check out my YouTube channel. It's Math with Luger. I am slowly uploading videos as I prepare each unit for my class. If you're one of my students or a parent or family member and you'd like to follow my classroom updates, my classroom Facebook is Luger's Math Class. Feel free to email me on my school email there or put a comment on the video. I'll get back to you as fast as I can. But hopefully this helped you out some and you have a better understanding now of how to work with integers.